The old barn stood at the far edge of the property, its weathered wood and rusted metal roof visible from the kitchen window where Elaine Mitchell washed dishes every evening. It had been there longer than the house itself, a silent guardian of secrets that had watched over their land for nearly 6 decades. Elaine dried her hands on a faded dishcloth and gazed out at the structure as the setting sun painted it in golden hues. She could almost see Robert there, walking with his slight limp toward his sanctuary, toolbox in hand and that half-smile on his face that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago. The barn had been Robert's space from the day they bought the farm in 1943, just 2 years after they got married. "Every man needs a place to think," he told her then, his voice soft but firm. She never questioned it, respecting the boundaries they'd set in their marriage. She had her garden and her sewing room. He had his barn. Their life together had been good. 3 children raised with love, a modest but comfortable living from the small farm, and 52 years of companionship that felt both like an eternity and the blink of an eye. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, droughts that threatened their livelihood, Robert's injury from the war that sometimes kept him up at night, the loss of their middle child to illness when he was just 7. Through it all, they had held each other up, finding strength in quiet moments and shared glances across the dinner table. But now Robert was gone, taken by cancer that had spread too quickly for doctors to do much about it. 2 months from diagnosis to funeral, barely enough time for Elaine to process what was happening before she found herself a widow at 74. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Dr. Green's voice pulled Elaine from her thoughts. She turned away from the window, facing the kind-eyed doctor who had been overseeing Robert's care. He sat at their kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of him. "I've brought the death certificate and some paperwork about your husband's arrangements." Elaine nodded, taking a seat across from him. Their daughter Linda had wanted to be here for this, but her flight from California had been delayed due to bad weather. It was just as well. Elaine needed to handle this herself. "Robert was very specific about his wishes," Dr. Green continued, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "He asked me to give you this after he passed." Elaine stared at the envelope, recognizing Robert's neat handwriting spelling out her name. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. "Thank you for bringing this by." "Of course," the doctor hesitated. "He also asked me to be present when you read it. Said there might be questions." Something cold settled in Elaine's stomach. What could Robert possibly have written that would require a doctor's presence? She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Elaine," she read aloud, her voice catching on her husband's familiar greeting. "If you're reading this, then I've gone ahead of you. Something I never wanted but always feared would happen. You know I've never been good with words when it comes to feelings, but I hope I showed you every day how much you meant to me." Elaine paused, blinking back tears. Even now, Robert could make her heart ache with his simple honesty. "I need to ask you for one last promise, and it's a big one. The barn at the edge of our property. I need you to leave it locked and untouched for 35 years after my passing." She looked up, meeting Dr. Green's steady gaze. 35 years? But why? The doctor simply nodded toward the letter. He explains. Elaine continued reading. "I know this sounds crazy and you deserve an explanation, but I can't give you one that would make sense right now. All I can say is that what's in that barn is meant to be a gift, but it can only be given at the right time. Dr. Green has agreed to be the keeper of this secret until then." "Doc, what's he talking about?" Elaine asked, setting the letter down. Dr. Green sighed. "Robert made me promise not to tell you the specifics, Mrs. Mitchell. But I can assure you there's nothing dangerous or illegal in the barn. It's something he worked on for many years, and the timing is important. But 35 years? I'll be," she calculated quickly, 109 years old if I'm even still alive. He considered that, the doctor said gently. "The letter addresses it." Elaine picked up the pages again, finding where she left off. "If you're worried about the timeline, don't be. If you're not here when the 35 years are up, provisions have been made for our children. And if none of you are around by then, which God forbid, there are further instructions with my lawyer." She shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. Robert had always been practical, not given to mystery or dramatics. This was so unlike him. "I know I'm asking a lot," the letter continued, "but in all our years together, have I ever steered you wrong? Trust me one last time, Elaine. Leave the barn be. Don't let anyone else go in there either. Not the kids, not curious neighbors, no one. The key is in the envelope. Keep it safe. Sure enough, when Elaine tilted the envelope, a small brass key fell into her palm. It was cold and heavier than it looked, as if weighted down by the promise it represented. If you agree to this, tell Dr. Green. He has some additional paperwork that will make everything official. If you don't, there was a noticeable pause in the writing here, as if Robert had struggled with what to say next. If you don't, I'll understand. I've never forced you into anything, and I won't start now, even from beyond. But I hope you'll honor this request. The letter ended with a simple, "I love you always, Robert." Elaine sat in silence for a long moment, the key clutched tightly in her hand. Outside, shadows lengthened as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the barn in darkness. "Did he tell you what's in there?" she finally asked. Dr. Green nodded. "Yes, but I'm bound by my promise to him." "And it's nothing that could hurt anyone?" "Absolutely not. In fact, quite the opposite." Elaine stood up and walked back to the window. The barn was barely visible now in the gathering dusk, just a darker shape against the darkening sky. For 52 years, she had respected that the barn was Robert's space. Even when the children were young and curious, she had enforced his wishes, telling them it was Dad's workshop and not a playground. Could she respect his wishes for another 35 years? Would she even live to see what mystery he had left behind? "There must be a reason," she murmured, more to herself than to the doctor. "He said it would all make sense when the time comes," Dr. Green offered. Robert was always a man who thought things through. That much was true. Her husband had never been impulsive, always considering consequences before acting. If he believed this strange request was necessary, he must have had good reason. "What happens if I open it before then?" she asked, turning back to face the doctor. He shrugged slightly. "Nothing dramatic. No booby traps or alarms, if that's what you're wondering. But whatever purpose Robert intended would be lost." Elaine looked down at the key in her hand, then at the letter on the table. 35 years was almost another lifetime at her age. She might never know what Robert had been keeping from her all these years. But wasn't that what love was about sometimes? Trusting without fully understanding? "I'll do it," she said finally. "I promise to keep the barn locked for 35 years. Dr. Green nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "He said you would. Said you were the most trustworthy person he'd ever known?" Elaine felt tears threatening again. "Did he suffer at the end? When I wasn't there?" The doctor's expression softened. "No, he went peacefully, thinking of you. His last words were about how lucky he was to have found you." She nodded, grateful for that small mercy. "What papers do I need to sign?" Dr. Green pulled out several documents explaining each one. There was a legal agreement about the barn, a trust set up to maintain the property, even provisions for what would happen if Elaine needed to sell the farm someday. "He thought of everything," she said as she signed the last page. "He wanted to make sure you were taken care of," the doctor replied. "Said it was his most important job." After Dr. Green left, Elaine sat alone at the kitchen table until well past midnight, reading and rereading Robert's letter. Occasionally she would get up and look out the window at the barn, a darker shadow in the night, keeper of her husband's final secret. 35 years, she whispered to the emptiness of the house that suddenly felt too big without Robert in it. What on earth could be worth waiting that long? She wouldn't know until 2020 if she lived that long. Until then, she would keep her promise, guarding whatever legacy her husband had left behind in that weathered old barn at the edge of their property. The key felt small but significant as she hung it on a chain around her neck, resting it next to her heart where Robert had always been, where he would always remain. 5 years had passed since Robert's death, and Elaine had kept her promise. The barn remained untouched, its weathered walls standing firm against rain, snow, and the occasional curious visitor. The brass key still hung around her neck, a constant reminder of the mystery that waited. "Mom, you really need to think about this," Linda said, stirring sugar into her coffee at the kitchen table. At 49, Linda had her father's practical nature and her mother's stubborn streak. "You can't keep living out here all alone. What if you fall or get sick?" Elaine glanced out the window toward the barn, barely visible through the morning mist. "I've been just fine these past 5 years. Mrs. Peters from church checks on me every other day, and I have my emergency button." She tapped the pendant hanging beside Robert's key. Linda sighed. "That's not the same as having someone here. Besides, David and I have plenty of room in our house." The grandkids would love having you closer. Elaine smiled at the mention of her grandchildren. They were the bright spots in her life now, especially after losing Robert. But California was so far from everything she knew, everything she'd built with her husband. What about the farm? She asked, already knowing the answer. We could sell it, Linda said gently. Property values in this area have gone up. You could get a good price. Elaine's hand automatically went to the key around her neck. And the barn? Linda shrugged. What about it? It's just an old building full of Dad's tools and whatever projects he was working on. We could clean it out, see if there's anything worth keeping. No. The word came out sharper than Elaine intended. She softened her tone. Your father wanted it left alone. I promised him. Mom, Dad's been gone 5 years. Whatever's in there isn't worth you living out here all by yourself just to guard it. Elaine stood up slowly, her joints protesting the movement. At 79, she felt every one of her years on damp mornings like this one. It's not about what's in there. It's about the promise I made. Linda followed her mother to the sink where Elaine busied herself washing the breakfast dishes. What exactly did Dad ask you to do? You've never really explained it. Elaine had never told her children the full story. She'd simply said their father wanted his workshop left undisturbed out of respect. It had seemed easier than trying to explain a request she herself didn't understand. He asked me to keep the barn locked for 35 years after his death, she said finally, not looking at her daughter. Until 2020, 35 years? Linda's voice rose in disbelief. But why? What could possibly be in there that needs to wait that long? Elaine shook her head. I don't know. He didn't tell me, and Dr. Green wouldn't either. This is ridiculous, Linda said, pacing the kitchen. You'd be 109 years old by then. Did Dad really expect you to wait that long? He made arrangements in case I'm not. Here, Elaine said, her hand still in the soapy water. There's paperwork with his lawyer. Linda stopped pacing. What kind of arrangements? I don't know all the details. Just that the farm is to stay in the family, and the barn is to remain locked until the 35 years are up. They both fell silent, the only sound the gentle splash of water as Elaine finished the dishes. Outside, the mist was lifting, revealing the full expanse of the farm. The fields Elaine now rented to a neighboring farmer, the apple orchard that still produced fruit each fall, and in the distance the mysterious barn. I can't leave. Linda, Elaine said finally. Not yet. Her daughter didn't argue further, but Elaine could see the worry in her eyes. It was the same look she'd given Robert when he refused further treatment after the cancer spread to his bones. A look that said she couldn't understand but would try to respect the decision anyway. That night, after Linda had gone to bed in her old room, Elaine sat on the porch swing, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. The barn was a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. 5 years down, 30 to go. What did you leave in there, Robert? She whispered to the night air. What was so important it's worth waiting a lifetime for? No answer came, just the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant hoot of an owl. 10 more years passed. Elaine's hair turned from silver to white, and her steps grew slower, but her mind remained sharp. Linda had eventually stopped trying to convince her mother to move to California, instead visiting more frequently and calling every day. Elaine's son James had moved his family to a town just 30 minutes away, allowing him to check on her regularly. The farm had changed over the years. The fields were still rented out, but Elaine had sold the orchard to a young couple who'd turned it into a pick-your-own business. She'd kept the house and 5 acres surrounding it, including, of course, the barn. On the 15th anniversary of Robert's death, Elaine sat at her kitchen table with James and his wife Carol, looking through old photo albums. Dad sure loved that old truck, James said, pointing to a picture of Robert leaning against a blue Ford pickup. Remember how he'd spend every Saturday morning tinkering with it? Elaine smiled at the memory. He said machines needed regular attention or they'd give up on you. Just like people. Where did that truck end up? Carol asked, turning the page to another photo. This one of the whole family at a picnic? I don't know, Elaine said thoughtfully. Now that I think about it, I don't remember seeing it after he got sick. I assumed he sold it, James frowned. That's strange. Dad loved that truck. I can't imagine him selling it, especially when he knew he was. He trailed off, not wanting to say the words. Even 15 years later, Robert's death was a tender subject. Maybe it's in the barn, Carol suggested innocently. James and Elaine exchanged a glance. The barn had become something of a family mystery over the years. All the grandchildren had grown up with strict instructions never to go near it, which of course only made them more curious. Maybe, Elaine said non-committally. We'll find out in 20 more years. Later, after James and Carol had gone home, Elaine found herself drawn to the window again, looking out at the barn in the moonlight. 15 years had passed, nearly half the time Robert had asked for. She was 94 now, and while her health was remarkably good for her age, she had no illusions about living another 20 years. She'd never told her children about the trust Robert had set up, the one that would pass the responsibility of the barn to them if she died before the 35 years were up. It was all in the paperwork with his lawyer, to be revealed only if necessary. She didn't want them to feel burdened by their father's strange request. Almost halfway there, she murmured, touching the key that still hung around her neck. It had become such a part of her that she sometimes forgot it was there until moments like this, when the mystery of the barn pressed on her mind. The years continued to pass. Elaine celebrated her 100th birthday surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Her body had grown frail, but she still lived in the farmhouse, now with the help of a live-in nurse named Patricia. "Mrs. Mitchell, your grandson is here," Patricia called from the hallway. Elaine looked up from her knitting, her fingers gnarled but still nimble enough to work the needles. "Send him in, dear." Tommy, James's oldest son, entered the sunroom where Elaine spent most of her days. At 35, he looked remarkably like his grandfather, the same crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, the same way of ducking his head slightly when he was thinking. "How's my favorite centenarian today?" he asked, bending to kiss her cheek. "Cheeky," she replied with a smile. "I'm your only centenarian." Tommy pulled up a chair beside her. "I brought you something." He held out a small box. Inside was a delicate silver chain. "Your dad mentioned the chain on your necklace was wearing thin," Tommy explained. "I thought you might like a new one." Elaine touched the brass key that hung on its worn chain. After 30 years, the metal had developed a patina that matched the weathered look of the barn it would someday unlock. "That's very thoughtful," she said. "Would you help me change it?" Tommy carefully undid the clasp of the old chain and transferred the key to the new one. As he fastened it around her neck, he asked the question she knew had been on his mind for years. "Grandma, what's really in the barn?" Elaine looked into his eyes, so like Robert's. "I wish I knew, Tommy. Your grandfather never told me. But you've kept it locked all these years. Aren't you curious?" "Of course I am," she admitted. "But I made a promise." Tommy nodded, understanding in his expression. 5 more years, right? Until 2020? "Yes," Elaine sighed. "Though I doubt I'll be here to see it." "Don't say that," Tommy protested. "You're the toughest person I know. If anyone can make it to 109, it's you." Elaine patted his hand. "We'll see. But if I don't, the responsibility will fall to your father and aunt. There are papers with Mr. Harmon, your grandfather's lawyer." "Dad mentioned something about that," Tommy said. "He said Grandpa set up some kind of trust?" "Yes, to make sure his wishes were carried out." She gazed out the window at the barn, still standing despite 3 decades of weather and neglect. The paint had long since peeled away, and vines crept up one side, but it remained structurally sound, as if determined to keep it secret until the appointed time. "Whatever's in there must be pretty special," Tommy mused. Elaine smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "Your grandfather was a practical man. If he thought it was worth waiting for, then it must be." That night, lying in bed with the new chain around her neck, Elaine whispered into the darkness, 30 years, Robert. I've kept your secret safe for 30 years. Just 5 more to go." She drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the day the barn would finally reveal its mystery, wondering if she would be there to see it or if, like so many promises in life, this one would have to be kept by the next generation. The year 2019 arrived with little fanfare at the Mitchell farm. 34 years had passed since Robert's death, and the promise Elaine had made was finally approaching its conclusion. At 108 years old, she had outlived everyone's expectations, including her own. "You're quite the miracle, Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Patel said during her monthly checkup in the farmhouse's front room. The young doctor had taken over her care after Dr. Green passed away 5 years earlier. "Your heart is strong, your mind is sharp. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Elaine smiled from her armchair by the window. the same spot where she'd spent countless hours watching the barn over the decades. "I've got something to stick around for," she said simply. After the doctor left, Elaine's great-granddaughter Lily helped her to the porch where a comfortable chair had been set up for her to enjoy the spring air. At 26, Lily was the spitting image of Linda at that age, the same determined chin, the same thoughtful eyes. She had moved into the farmhouse 6 months ago after Patricia, Elaine's nurse, had retired. "One more year." "Great-grandma," Lily said, adjusting a blanket over Elaine's lap despite the mild weather. "Are you excited?" Elaine's gnarled fingers found the key that still hung around her neck, now on its third chain. "Nervous mostly," she admitted. "What if it's nothing special? What if your great-grandfather just had some old car parts in there and made me wait all these years as some kind of joke?" Lily laughed. "From everything you've told me about great-grandpa Robert, he wasn't much of a prankster." "No, he wasn't," Elaine agreed, her eyes drifting to the barn. After all these years, it was still standing, though it leaned slightly to one side now, and the roof had needed repairs twice. The family had seen to its maintenance, respecting Robert's wishes even if they didn't understand them. "Have you decided who will be with you when you open it?" Lily asked, sitting in the chair beside her great-grandmother. Elaine had been thinking about this for months. Her children, now in their 70s, had never stopped wondering about the barn. Her grandchildren had grown up with the mystery, and now her great-grandchildren were equally curious. "I think just your grandmother Linda," she said finally. "She was closest to her father. It seems right that she should be there." Lily nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "That makes sense," Elaine patted her hand. "But afterward, everyone can see. Whatever's in there has waited long enough." That evening, Elaine called Linda in California. Despite being 79 now, Linda still worked part-time as a consultant and traveled frequently. "Mom, I was just about to call you," Linda said when she answered. "I've been thinking about next year." "So have I," Elaine replied, her voice thin but clear. "I want you to be here when I open the barn." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure? James lives closer and the grandkids—" "I'm sure," Elaine interrupted gently. "You're the oldest. You remember your father best. It should be you." Linda's voice wavered slightly when she spoke again. "I'll be there, Mom. Just tell me when." May 15th, 2020, Elaine said without hesitation. 35 years to the day. After hanging up, Elaine sat in the quiet house listening to the familiar creaks and settling noises that had been her companions for decades. She'd outlived 2 of her closest friends and all of her contemporaries in the small town nearby. Sometimes she wondered if Robert had somehow known she would live this long, if that was why he'd chosen such a distant date. "One more year," she whispered to the empty room. "Just one more year." Winter turned to spring, and with each passing day, Elaine felt the anticipation building. She began having dreams about the barn, dreams where she approached the doors but could never quite reach them, or where the key wouldn't fit the lock. She told herself it was just nerves, just the natural result of waiting so long for something. In March, a letter arrived from Mr. Harmon, Jr., the son of Robert's original lawyer. The envelope contained documents confirming that the trust Robert had established would expire on May 15th, 2020, exactly 35 years after his death. "The property and all contents therein will revert to your full control at that time," the letter stated formally. "Per my father's notes, I am to inform you that no conditions will apply after this date." Elaine showed the letter to Lily over breakfast. "It's really happening," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "After all these years, we'll finally know. Have you ever been tempted?" Lily asked, pouring her great-grandmother a cup of tea. "In all this time, have you ever thought about just opening it early?" Elaine considered the question. "Once," she admitted. "About 10 years after your great-grandfather died. I was feeling particularly lonely one evening, missing him terribly. I took the key and walked all the way to the barn. I even put the key in the lock." "What stopped you?" "I remembered something Robert always used to say. A promise doesn't mean much if you only keep it when it's easy. It would have been easy to open that door, to satisfy my curiosity. But it wouldn't have been right." Lily squeezed her hand. "Great-grandpa would be proud of you." As April rolled into May, the Mitchell family began making arrangements to gather at the farm. James and his wife would be there, along with all 3 grandchildren and their spouses and 5 great-grandchildren. Linda would fly in from California 3 days before the big day. It was turning into quite the family reunion. "They're coming for the barn, not for me," Elaine joked to Lily as they reviewed the sleeping arrangements. The farmhouse had 4 bedrooms, but they would need to set up air mattresses in the living room to accommodate everyone. "They're coming for both," Lily corrected her. "The barn is just an excuse to celebrate you and Great-Grandpa." The night before Linda was due to arrive, Elaine had trouble sleeping. Her mind kept racing with possibilities about what might be in the barn. Over the years, she'd come up with countless theories. Everything from a valuable car collection to letters Robert had written for each year she would live without him. Nothing seemed quite right, though. Nothing explained why it had to be 35 years exactly. She got up around midnight and made her way slowly to the kitchen with the help of her walker. Lily heard her and appeared in the hallway, hair tousled from sleep. "Everything okay, Great-Grandma?" "Just restless," Elaine said. "Too many thoughts." Lily made them both cups of chamomile tea and they sat at the kitchen table in comfortable silence. Through the window, the barn was visible in the moonlight, a dark shape against the night sky. "What if it's empty?" Elaine said suddenly, voicing the fear that had been growing inside her. "What if there's nothing there at all?" Lily considered this. "Then we'll know Great-Grandpa had a strange sense of humor." Despite her anxiety, Elaine laughed. "That he did not. Your great-grandfather was many things, but funny wasn't one of them." "Then there must be something there," Lily said confidently. "Something worth waiting for." The next morning, Linda arrived, looking remarkably like her mother despite the years that had turned her hair white and added lines to her face. She hugged Elaine carefully as if afraid she might break. "Mom, you look wonderful," she said, stepping back to examine her. "I swear you haven't aged a day since I saw you at Christmas." Elaine snorted. "Now I know you need glasses. I'm ancient and we both know it." They spent the day catching up, looking through old photo albums and reminiscing about Robert. It felt right to remember him now, to bring him back into the house through their stories and memories. "Do you remember how he used to sing in the shower?" Linda asked, laughing. "Always the same 3 songs and always off-key." "And how he could fix anything," Elaine added. "Toasters, cars, broken hearts. He had magic hands." As evening approached, more family members arrived. James and Carol, grandchildren with their spouses, great-grandchildren bubbling with excitement about the mysterious barn. The house filled with noise and laughter and the smell of the large meal they prepared together. After dinner, as everyone sat in the living room sharing stories and catching up, Tommy asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "So, Grandma, any last guesses about what's in the barn?" All eyes turned to Elaine, sitting in her favorite armchair with the key around her neck. She smiled, enjoying the anticipation on their faces, the same anticipation she'd carried for 35 years. "I've had plenty of theories," she said, "but none of them feel right. Whatever your grandfather left in there, it was important enough to wait for. That's all I know for sure." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Elaine stood at her bedroom window looking out at the barn. One more day. After 35 years of wondering, of keeping her promise through good times and bad, through loneliness and joy, she would finally know. "I hope I've made you proud," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass slightly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I kept my word." As she drifted off to sleep, her hand clutched the key that had hung near her heart for so long. Tomorrow it would fulfill its purpose at last. May 15th, 2020 dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of apple blossoms from the neighboring orchard. Elaine woke early, her heart fluttering in her chest like a bird. Today was the day, after 35 years of waiting, of wondering, of keeping her promise to Robert. She would finally learn what secret the barn had been guarding all this time. She lay in bed for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the house as it woke up around her. Footsteps in the hallway, water running in the bathroom, quiet conversations drifting up from the kitchen. Her family was here, gathered to witness the end of a mystery that had spanned more than 3 decades. A soft knock at her door was followed by Lily's voice. "Great-Grandma, are you awake?" "Come in, dear," Elaine called. Lily entered carrying a breakfast tray. At 108, Elaine still insisted on joining the family for meals whenever possible, but today was special. Today she wanted a few quiet moments to herself before facing whatever the day would bring. "I thought you might want to eat here this morning," Lily said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Everyone's a bit wound up downstairs." Elaine smiled. "I imagine they are. How many years have they been hearing about the mysterious barn, and now they'll finally get some answers." How are you feeling? Lily asked, helping Elaine sit up against her pillows. Nervous, Elaine admitted. What if it's not what everyone expects? What if they're disappointed? Lily adjusted the tray across her great-grandmother's lap. Whatever's in there, it was important to Great-Grandpa Robert. That makes it special no matter what. Elaine nodded, taking a sip of tea. The warm liquid soothed her nerves somewhat. What time is it? Just after 7. Mom said we should aim for around 10 o'clock if that works for you. The light will be good then and everyone will be ready. 10 o'clock. In just 3 hours the waiting would be over. Elaine's hand went automatically to the key around her neck. The small piece of metal that had been her constant companion for 35 years. Tell everyone 10 o'clock is perfect, she said. After breakfast, Lily helped Elaine dress in her favorite outfit, a simple blue dress that Robert had always loved. Paired with a cardigan against the morning chill, her white hair was arranged neatly and she even allowed Lily to add a touch of pink lipstick. You look beautiful, Lily said as Elaine studied her reflection in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was deeply lined, her skin translucent with age, but her eyes were bright and clear, the same eyes that had caught Robert's attention at a church social 89 years ago. He always said blue was my color, Elaine murmured, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Downstairs, the family had gathered in the living room. They fell silent when Elaine entered, supported by Lily on one side and her walker on the other. The respect in their eyes moved her deeply, respect not just for her age, but for the promise she had kept all these years. Linda stepped forward, taking her mother's free hand. Are you ready, Mom? Elaine nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. They moved as a group toward the front door, everyone instinctively slowing their pace to match Elaine's. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across the yard. The old barn stood in the distance, patient as ever, its weathered board silver gray with age. Wait, Elaine said as they reached the porch steps. I'd like just Linda to come with me first. The rest of you can wait here until we call you. There were a few disappointed looks, but no one argued. This was Elaine's moment, her reward for decades of faithfully keeping her word. The walk to the barn seemed both longer and shorter than Elaine remembered. With Linda supporting her on one side and her walker on the other, she made her way slowly across the yard, feeling every one of her 108 years in the stiffness of her joints and the shortness of her breath. Take your time, Mom, Linda said gently. There's no rush. But there was, Elaine thought. 35 years of rush, of waiting, all coming down to this moment. As they approached the barn, Elaine was struck by how unchanged it appeared despite the decades that had passed. The padlock on the door was rusted but intact, the chain threaded through it still strong. She wondered briefly if the key would even work after all this time, or if they would need to break the lock. Are you okay? Linda asked, noticing her hesitation. Elaine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for since that day in 1985, when Robert had made his strange request. With trembling fingers, she removed the chain from around her neck. The key felt heavier than usual, weighted with expectation. Linda reached out to steady her mother's hand as Elaine inserted the key into the padlock. It stuck at first, resistance from years of disuse, but then turned with a satisfying click. The padlock opened and Linda removed it from the chain, letting both fall to the ground. Ready? She asked, her hand on the barn door. Elaine took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. Together they pushed open the door. It creaked loudly on hinges that hadn't moved in 35 years, letting in a flood of sunlight that illuminated dancing dust motes in the air. For a moment, Elaine couldn't see anything in the sudden brightness. She blinked, waiting for her eyes to adjust. Beside her, she heard Linda gasp. Mom, she whispered. Oh my God! As Elaine's vision cleared, she saw what had shocked her daughter into silence. The barn was filled with light, not just from the open door, but from skylights that had been installed in the roof, carefully hidden from outside view. And in that light stood row upon row of gleaming vintage cars, their chrome and paintwork preserved under dust covers that had been partially removed, as if someone had been there just recently. Robert's cars, Elaine breathed. Her husband had always loved classic automobiles, tinkering with them in his spare time, but she had no idea he had amassed such a collection. She counted at least a dozen vehicles, each one a treasure, but it wasn't just cars. Along one wall stood glass display cases filled with what looked like memorabilia, old gas station signs, vintage advertisements, model cars, and framed documents. Another wall held an enormous pegboard of tools, each one hanging in its designated spot, clean and rust-free. "How is this possible?" Linda asked, stepping further into the barn. "These cars should be covered in dust, the tires flat, the batteries dead." Elaine moved forward slowly, her walker forgotten as she leaned on her daughter for support. In the center of the barn floor stood Robert's blue Ford pickup, the one he'd driven for years, the one that had mysteriously disappeared before his death. It looked brand new, its paint gleaming under the skylight. "Someone's been maintaining all this," Linda said, running her hand along the fender of a red Corvette. "Everything's in perfect condition." Elaine's legs suddenly felt weak and she sank to her knees on the concrete floor. Linda rushed to her side. "Mom, are you okay?" But Elaine wasn't listening. Her attention had been caught by something on the workbench near the pickup, a thick envelope with her name written on it in familiar handwriting. "Help me up," she said urgently. "There's a letter." Linda helped her to her feet and over to the workbench. With shaking hands, Elaine picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, filled with more than just a single sheet of paper. "Should I get the others?" Linda asked, looking around the barn in amazement. "In a minute," Elaine said. "I want to read this first." She carefully opened the envelope and pulled out several pages covered in Robert's neat handwriting. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My dearest Elaine," she read aloud, her voice trembling. "If you're reading this, then you've kept your promise for 35 years. I never doubted that you would." Linda moved closer, putting an arm around her mother's shoulders as she continued reading. "You're probably wondering why I asked for so much time. The answer is simple and complicated all at once. What you see around you represents our retirement fund. Cars I've collected and restored over the years. Cars that will only increase in value with time. But more than that, they represent my life's passion, something I wanted to share with you but never found the right way to do while I was alive." Elaine paused, overwhelmed by emotion. All these years, she had thought of the barn as Robert's private space, never realizing it contained so much of himself, so much of what he had loved. "I've arranged for everything to be maintained over the years," the letter continued. "The trust fund I set up covers not just the upkeep of the cars but the modifications to the barn itself. Climate control, security, everything needed to preserve these vehicles. By my calculations, the collection should be worth several $1,000,000 by 2020, enough to ensure that you and our children and their children will be taken care of." "Several million," Linda whispered, looking around with new eyes. Elaine barely heard her. She was focused on the words in front of her, on Robert's voice speaking to her across the decades. "But the real reason for the 35-year wait wasn't about money. It was about giving you something to look forward to, something to keep you going after I was gone. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you alone, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, if you had this mystery to solve, this promise to keep, it might give you a reason to stay strong, to keep living even when I couldn't be there with you anymore." Tears spilled down Elaine's cheeks. After all these years, she finally understood. Robert hadn't been keeping a secret from her. He'd been giving her a gift. The gift of purpose, of anticipation, of something to live for when he was gone. She sank to her knees again, clutching the letter to her chest. Linda knelt beside her, her own eyes wet with tears. "He did this for me," Elaine whispered. "All of it. The cars, the waiting, everything. It was to give me a reason to keep going without him." As the sunlight streamed through the skylights, illuminating the treasures Robert had left behind, Elaine felt a weight lift from her heart. For 35 years she had kept her promise, not knowing why, but trusting in the man she had loved. And now she understood that in his own way, he had been keeping a promise to her as well. A promise to take care of her, even after he was gone. "Let's get the others," she said finally, wiping away her tears. It's time they shared in this too. As Linda helped her to her feet, Elaine took one last look around the barn that had held Robert's secret for so long. It wasn't just a collection of cars she saw now, but a testament to love. A love that had transcended death and time. A love that had given her the strength to keep a 35-year promise. Word spread quickly through the Mitchell family waiting on the farmhouse porch. Excited voices called back and forth as Linda hurried toward them, her face alight with wonder. You won't believe it, she told them, slightly breathless from the walk. It's incredible. Dad left a fortune in classic cars. They're all perfectly preserved. The family rushed toward the barn, a stream of curious faces and eager questions. Only Lily held back, noticing that her great-grandmother remained kneeling inside the barn, Robert's letter still clutched in her hands. "Great-grandma?" she asked softly, stepping into the cool shade of the building. "Are you okay?" Elaine looked up, her eyes shining with tears that weren't entirely from sadness. "I'm fine, dear. Just taking a moment." She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her cardigan pocket. "Would you help me up? I don't want to miss seeing everyone's faces." With Lily's assistance, Elaine rose to her feet and moved to a wooden chair that sat near the workbench. Robert's chair, she realized. The one he'd sat in while working on his beloved vehicles. From this vantage point, she watched as her family flooded into the barn, their exclamations of surprise and delight washing over her like music. "Is that a '57 Chevy? Look at this Ford. It's in mint condition. How did Grandpa manage to keep all this hidden?" Tommy was examining the blue pickup truck with expert eyes. "This would have been worth maybe $5,000 when Great-Grandpa died," he said, running his hand along the fender. "Now, probably closer to $50,000, and that's just for this one vehicle." James stood in the center of the barn, turning slowly to take it all in. Dad never said a word about this collection. "I knew he liked old cars, but this is museum quality." Elaine smiled, watching her family discover the treasures Robert had left behind. There were 14 vehicles in total, ranging from a 1930s roadster to a 1970s muscle car, each one lovingly restored and maintained. Between them, according to the additional paperwork in the envelope, they were worth well over $4 million. But there was more to Robert's gift than just the cars. As the family explored further, they found other surprises tucked away in the barn's corners. "Great-Grandma, look at this." Lily called from a far wall where she'd discovered a series of framed photographs, images of Robert and Elaine throughout their marriage, from their wedding day to their 50th anniversary. Alongside them hung pictures of their children growing up, family vacations, holiday gatherings, a visual history of their life together. In another corner, Linda found a large wooden chest. Inside were handmade gifts for each of the great-grandchildren born after Robert's death. Carved wooden toys, music boxes, small pieces of furniture crafted with the same care he'd given to his automotive restorations. He made these before he died, Linda realized, lifting out a delicately carved rocking horse. And someone's been adding to them over the years. The chest contained items for every great-grandchild, even those born decades after Robert's passing. "The letter explains that too," Elaine said, her voice stronger now. "Robert hired a caretaker, Mr. Wilson from the next town over. He's been maintaining the cars and adding items to the collection based on instructions Robert left. There's a whole separate trust just for that purpose." "Mr. Wilson," James repeated. "The guy who runs the auto shop on Main Street? He never said a word all these years." "He promised your father he wouldn't," Elaine said simply. "Just like I did." The exploration continued throughout the morning, with each family member finding something that spoke to them personally. Tommy, who had inherited his grandfather's love of cars, spent hours examining each vehicle, occasionally letting out a low whistle of appreciation. The younger children were drawn to the workbench where Robert had left a collection of model cars and planes he'd built with his own hands. Around noon, Lily noticed that Elaine was looking tired. "Should we head back to the house for lunch?" she suggested. "Not yet," Elaine said. "There's one more thing I need to do first." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter again. Robert left instructions about what should happen next. "I'd like to read them to everyone." The family gathered around her chair, falling silent as Elaine unfolded the pages with careful fingers. "There's a section here addressed to all of you," she said, finding her place in the letter. Robert writes, "To my family, those I knew in life and those who came after. This collection represents not just my passion for automobiles, but my love for all of you. Each car has been chosen and restored with care, not just as an investment but as a piece of history to be preserved and enjoyed." Elaine paused, taking a moment to look at the faces around her, her children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all bound together by the love she and Robert had shared. "My wish," she continued reading, is that you don't simply sell these vehicles for profit, though that is your right if you choose to do so. Instead, I hope you might consider establishing a small museum or foundation in our family name. The blue pickup truck, however, belongs to Elaine for as long as she wants it. It was the first vehicle I ever restored, and it has always been her favorite, though she pretended not to care about such things. Elaine looked up at the truck, remembering the countless Saturdays Robert had spent tinkering with it, and the Sunday drives they'd taken along country roads with the windows down and the radio playing. She hadn't realized he'd known how much she loved that old pickup. Whatever you decide, the letter continued, know that I am proud of the family we created together, and that my greatest achievement was not these cars but the love we shared. Remember me not as a collector of things, but as a collector of moments with all of you. There wasn't a dry eye in the barn when Elaine finished reading. Even James, who rarely showed emotion, was wiping away tears. So what do we do? Linda asked finally, looking around at the gleaming vehicles. We do what Dad asked, James replied. We start a foundation, the Mitchell Family Automotive Museum. The rest of the day passed in a blur of planning and dreaming. The family shared lunch on the farmhouse porch, talking excitedly about how they would honor Robert's wishes. Tommy, with his knowledge of classic cars, would oversee the collection. Linda, with her business experience, would handle the financial aspects. Even the youngest members of the family were included, assigned the task of gathering stories about their great-grandfather to share with museum visitors. As evening approached, Elaine found herself back in the barn, sitting alone in Robert's chair as the setting sun cast long shadows through the skylights. The family had returned to the house for dinner, but she'd asked for a few minutes alone with her thoughts. Her fingers traced the worn wooden armrests of the chair, polished smooth by years of Robert's hands resting in the same spots. She could almost feel him here with her, surrounded by the things he had loved. You gave me 35 more years, she whispered to the empty barn. You knew I'd need something to live for, something to keep me going without you. And you were right. She hadn't thought she would live to see this day. At 74, the 35-year wait had seemed impossible. But year after year had passed and she had found the strength to continue. Not just for Robert's secret, but for the growing family that needed her, for the garden that still bloomed each spring, for the simple pleasure of watching the seasons change across the fields she had called home for so long. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Linda appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the evening sky. Mom, dinner's ready. Elaine nodded but didn't move from the chair. Did I ever tell you about the day your father proposed to me? Linda shook her head, stepping into the barn. I don't think so. It was in this pickup truck, Elaine said, gesturing to the blue Ford. We were driving home from a dance, and he pulled over at the top of Miller's Hill, where you could see the whole valley spread out below. I thought he was just stopping to look at the view. Instead, he turned to me and said, I don't have much to offer except a life built day by day with love in every moment. Would that be enough for you? Linda smiled, sitting on a nearby stool. And you said yes. I did, Elaine confirmed. And he kept his promise. Every day we had together was built with love. She patted the letter in her pocket. Even the days after he was gone. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the conversation turned to the future of the farm and the newly discovered car collection. Plans were made for renovating the barn into a proper museum space, for cataloging each vehicle and researching its history. What about you, Great-Grandma? Lily asked. What do you want to do with your pickup truck? Elaine smiled, thinking of the decades-old vehicle that held so many memories. I think I'd like to take it for a drive, she said, surprising everyone. Just down to the end of the lane and back, for old time's sake. The next morning, with Tommy carefully behind the wheel and Elaine in the passenger seat, the blue pickup rolled slowly down the farm's driveway for the first time in 35 years. The engine purred as if it had been driven just yesterday, a testament to Robert's skill and Mr. Wilson's faithful maintenance. As they reached the main road, Elaine rolled down her window and let the spring breeze wash over her face. She could almost feel Robert beside her, his arms stretched across the back of the seat, his fingers occasionally brushing her shoulder the way they used to on Sunday drives. He'd be so proud, Tommy said, glancing at his great-grandmother, not just of the cars but of you, for keeping your promise all these years. Elaine nodded, her eyes on the familiar landscape rolling past the window. "A promise doesn't mean much if you only keep it when it's easy," she said, echoing Robert's words from so long ago. When they returned to the farm, the entire family was waiting on the porch. They stood together, watching as the blue pickup completed its journey, returning to the place where it had waited so patiently for 35 years. In that moment, as Elaine looked at the faces of her loved ones framed against the backdrop of the old farmhouse and the barn beyond, she understood the true legacy Robert had left behind. It wasn't the valuable car collection or even the promise she had kept for so long. It was this, the family they had built together, strong enough to weather time and loss, bound by love that extended far beyond a single lifetime. And that, she knew, was worth every minute of the 35-year wait.